Ever stubbed your toe on something you swear wasn't there a second ago?
Oh, yeah, I think we've all been there.
Makes you wonder, right? Like, what if reality is a bit more flexible than we think?
Okay, I'm intrigued. Where are we going with this?
Well, today's deep dive is all about questioning the very nature of reality itself. We're tackling George Berkeley, an 18th century philosopher who wasn't afraid to ask the big, weird questions.
Ah, Berkeley. The OG of, is this real life or is this just fantasy?
Exactly. Except instead of a rock opera, he gave us immaterialism.
Immaterialism.
Yeah.
So is this the part where you tell me my coffee isn't real?
Well, about that coffee, Berkeley might say it's not quite what we think it is.
All right, I'm listening. Hit me with Berkeley's greatest hits.
This guy was a total rock star, at least in the philosophy world. Instead of assuming the world is just stuff, he asked, what if reality, at its core, is about perception? What if it's all about what happens in our minds?
Okay, that's a pretty big what if. How did he back that up?
So Berkeley wasn't saying the world is an illusion. It's not like things pop in and out of existence when we close our eyes.
That's a relief. My coffee's safe. For now.
For now. But he was saying that what we call reality is inseparable from how we experience it through our senses, through our minds.
So, right, so walk me through it. Let's say I have this amazing, super metaphorical mug of coffee. How is that just a figment of my imagination?
Well, think about it. You see the mug, smell the coffee, feel the warmth with your hands.
Yeah, best part of my morning.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
But those sensations, sight, smell, touch, those are all happening in your mind, right? Berkeley would say you're not experiencing the coffee directly, only the idea of coffee created by your senses and your brain.
So my senses give my brain data, and my brain says, here's some coffee, you're welcome.
Basically. And it's not just coffee. This goes for everything we experience. This is where his famous phrase comes in. To be is to be perceived.
To be is to be perceived. Catchy, I can see why that one stuck around. But like if I turn away from my coffee, it doesn't disappear, does it?
You're right, it doesn't. It's always there. Well, almost always.
Okay, now you've got me nervous about my coffee again. What do you mean almost always?
Think about it like this. What about that classic example, a tree falling in the forest? Does it make a sound if no one's around to hear it?
Ah, a classic philosophical head scratcher.
Right. So for Berkeley, the tree still exists, even if we don't see it. But the sound, that crashing, those rustling leaves, that's a perception, a sensation that only comes into being when a mind is there to experience it.
Interesting. So the tree exists, but the experience of the tree falling, the sound, that only happens if a mind is there to catch it.
Exactly. And for Berkeley, there's always one mind that's always on, keeping things running even when we aren't looking.
I think I know where you're going with this. We're talking about the ultimate observer, right? The one who never misses a beat.
You got it. Berkeley believed God's perception is what ensures the world doesn't just blink out of existence every time we turn our backs on it. It's like God is the one making sure the game is still running, even when we log off for a bit.
Okay, hold on. So we've gone from my coffee mug to a tree falling in the forest to the idea that God is basically the ultimate streamer, keeping the universe online 24/7.
It's a bold concept. And that was Berkeley for you. But we're just getting started, because Berkeley's ideas weren't without their challengers. And up next, we'll delve into how his theories stacked up against some of the other philosophical heavy hitters of the 18th century. So we're talking about a philosophical clash of titans here.
Absolute.
But it's not like Berkeley is saying the world is an illusion, right? Like, I'm pretty sure I stubbed my toe on a very real, very solid coffee table this morning.
He'd agree with you that Berkeley isn't denying the reality of what we experience. He's more interested in digging deeper into what we mean by real. He'd say claiming the coffee table is real because it's made of wood just pushes the question back a step. What's wood made of? Particles. What are those made of? Berkeley argues that ultimately, we arrive at perceptions, sensations, ideas as the fundamental building blocks of our experience.
So instead of a universe made of tiny Legos, it's more like a universe made of thoughts.
You're getting it. And here's where it gets really interesting. If everything we perceive boils down to an idea in a mind, then whose mind is doing all the work? We've touched on God's role as the ultimate observer, but what about our own minds? If my mind is shaping my reality, does that mean your reality is totally different? Are we all just walking around in our own little isolated bubbles of perception?
That's a bit of a dizzying thought.
It's a question philosophers are still debating. Berkeley argued that while our individual perceptions might differ, you might find that coffee table painfully modern, while I appreciate its minimalist design, there's a shared fundamental reality that we all tap into thanks to God's continuous perception.
So we're all experiencing the same world, but with our own personal filters, like custom settings on the grand reality game.
Exactly. We're all playing the same game, but our experiences are shaped by our unique perspectives, memories, and interpretations. Now, imagine presenting this idea back in the 1700s. It definitely ruffled some feathers.
I bet people probably thought Berkeley was off his rocker.
There were definitely some raised eyebrows and skeptical looks. After all, this was a time when the prevailing view was much closer to Locke's, a belief in a solid, independent material world. Berkeley was challenging the very foundation of how people understood the universe.
So he was like the philosophical rebel of his time,
Yeah.
rocking the boat and making everyone question their reality.
Exactly. But that's what great philosophers do, right? They make us question our assumptions, challenge our perspectives, and consider new ways of looking at the world. And whether people agreed with him or not, Berkeley's ideas sparked debate and got people thinking differently. His work had a lasting impact on Western philosophy.
All by questioning the nature of a table.
That's the beauty of philosophy. It can start with the seemingly mundane and lead to profound insights. But some of our listeners might be wondering how this very 18th century philosophy applies to our 21st century lives.
Especially in an age where we're constantly bombarded with information and different perspectives.
That's a great point. I think Berkeley's ideas are even more relevant now than ever. Think about how much of our lives are lived online, filtered through screens. We're constantly creating and curating our own personal realities online, choosing what to focus on, what to share, and what to ignore.
It's like we're all editors of our own digital realities, crafting the way the world sees us and how we see the world in turn.
Precisely. And with the rise of virtual reality and the metaverse, we're blurring the lines between physical and digital realities even further. Berkeley's focus on perception and the power of the mind to shape experience has some pretty profound implications for how we navigate this increasingly digital world.
So where did that leave us? Like, it's kind of a mind-blowing idea that we're all shaping our own reality.
It is a big idea. But I think for Berkeley, it wasn't about getting lost in the weeds of what is real. It was about how this understanding can change how we live and interact with the world.
Okay, so how do we actually do that? What are we supposed to take away from all this?
I think a good place to start is awareness. Recognizing that how we see the world isn't some objective truth. It's filtered through our own experiences, our own biases, everything that makes us us.
So like, my deep and abiding love for oversized sweaters isn't some universal truth. It's just my thing.
Exactly. And someone else might see that sweater and think, way too itchy. The point is, there's no one right way to experience an oversized sweater.
Or coffee mug.
Huh.
Or a tree falling in the forest.
Exactly. And that understanding, that willingness to acknowledge that other perspectives are just as valid is huge. It changes how we approach everything from disagreements to how we build relationships.
It's like instead of going into a conversation like, I'm right, you're wrong, it's more like, okay, help me understand how you're seeing this.
Right. It opens the door for connection instead of conflict. And that's something I think we could all use a little more of.
So Berkeley might have been onto something with this whole perception thing. It's like a whole different way of looking at the world and ourselves, really.
He definitely gave us a lot to think about.
That's for sure. So next time you find yourself questioning if that coffee table really just jumped out in front of you, remember George Berkeley? He reminds us that reality might be a little more about perception than we realize. And who knows, maybe that realization can make the world a little more interesting, a little more understanding.
And a lot more philosophical.
And on that note, this has been The Deep Dive, reminding you to keep questioning, keep exploring, and as always, keep those perceptions sharp.